Deontay Wilder won the WBC heavyweight title in January 2015. I don't believe there's a current heavyweight active who's had a heavyweight title before January 2015. Well, unless you're going to throw Riddick Bowe, Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson in the mix. They're still semi-active. Well, Bowe tried to be semi-active. Then I'm guessing you have Tyson Fury, who won 3 belts, 10 months later in November of 2015. By summer, I believe, 2016, Tyson Fury had no belts, no defenses, no nothing. Stripped, gave them up. PD issues, substance abuse issues, a lot of issues. Anthony Joshua won his first belt March 2016. But it's been over 6 years, because Tyson Fury didn't get a belt back until early last year. So that's 4 years he's went without having a belt. But for the last 6 years, there hasn't been a period until recently, till AJ lost Saturday gone against Usyk, where either he didn't have a belt, 1 belt, 2 or 3 belts, and Deontay Wilder didn't have his WBC belt. So they pretty much have been the most active heavyweight champions in the last 6 years. Like, Fury had a little window where he could have tied up the belts with Deontay Wilder in 2016. And, of course, he had a window, well, if you want to call it a window, where we thought he was going to pull 4 straps with Anthony Joshua. Then the arbitration came along. But for the most part, Wilder and AJ have been the most active heavyweight champions in the last 6 years. Deontay Wilder making 10 defenses of his WBC belt. Anthony Joshua made 6 defenses of his IBF title. 3 of them defenses were for the IBF, WBO, and WBA belts. He also won back the belts that he lost from Andy Ruiz and made a mandatory defense against Kubrat Pulev. So he has 7 world title defenses behind him and a total of 8 world title wins. Tyson Fury is yet to defend a belt. That all changes next week at the T-Mobile Las Vegas. From March 2018, when AJ added his 3rd world title belt to his collection, Joshua and Wilder had a solid 2 years plus to make an undisputed fight, and it didn't happen. Now, for the first time since January 2015, neither of them have a belt. Alexander Usyk currently owns all the 3 straps that AJ accumulated, and Tyson Fury has the WBC belt that he took from Wilder in their rematch. Now, Wilder was comprehensively beaten in that rematch. It was a heavy beating. AJ was comprehensively outboxed and outpointed by the smaller Alexander Usyk. You could make the argument, after watching Wilder getting pounded by Fury, that he has no chance of winning that 3rd fight. You could argue, after watching AJ struggle with the southpaw skills of Alexander Usyk, that he has no chance of outboxing Usyk in their rematch set for next year. Now, with Wilder and AJ's respective KO ratios, you have to give them both a puncher's chance in their rematches. But the Wilder fans and the Anthony Joshua fans, hands up, are putting a whole lot of faith, hope, and stock that both men can rewrite the script and beat the 2 men who beat them comprehensively. I mean, Tyson Fury has fought Wilder a couple of ways. He fought him from range and was pretty successful in their first fight, which ended up a draw. And in the second time, he fought him up close and outslugged him and outstrengthened and outmuscled him. He's defeated him in 2 ways. If by March, when AJ should have fought Usyk in the rematch, the dust settles and neither AJ or Wilder have belts, well, it's going to be up to Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk to get the politics out of the way and get the papers signed up and get in the ring and battle it out so boxing can have an undisputed heavyweight champion. If that is the scenario, the only question is, are they going to let down the boxing fans and waste as much time as AJ and Wilder did? Now, I know some of you are going to say Wilder turned down this, and some of you may say AJ turned down this. Just for this video, let's not throw shade on one or the other. Let's just say there was opportunities wasted on either side. Mandatories, promotional conflicts, network conflicts, egos, throwing blame at each other, eventually defeats on both sides. In all truth, maybe AJ does beat Usyk and maybe Wilder does beat Fury, and then we're back to where he was in 2016, I guess, when they both had one belt each. I mean, look at that. All that back and forth between Wilder and Eddie Hearn mostly more than AJ. AJ didn't say much back to Wilder. Shelley Finkel, Lou DiBella, the media, the supporters of the PBC or Wilder or Matchroom and AJ, UK versus US. All that energy. I made this offer. They turned down that offer. All of that energy for what? For both of them not to have belts? For what? Look at where both of their careers are. If you was on the side arguing for either Wilder or Joshua, why the fight didn't happen? Do you care about any of them arguments now over the last 4 or 5 years? Does it really mean anything to you? And if it does, you're in a bad place in life. The point of the video is we've got to set precedents where there's a culture of expectation that as the heavyweight champion, you're the baddest man on the planet. Well, if that's the case, you can't have your rivals saying they're the baddest too. In Jamaica, they say two bull cannot rule in one pen. Ali, Tyson, Lewis were undisputed champions before they were 24. There has to be a template somewhere. Standards have to be upheld. If standards are not upheld, what do you have? Fury, Wilder, AJ, Usyk. Contenders like Joyce, Dillian, Andy Ruiz. They're all in their 30s now. By the time the likes of Vagovic get a title shot, he'll be 30, maybe 31, with all the traffic in front of him. Tony Yoka, he'll be 30 next year. Luis Ortiz, probably near his 50s or something. Too much wasted opportunities. The first thing that has to be dealt with, and this includes everybody who wants to see good boxing, we can't have a repeat of that. We can't. We can't have a repeat of Crawford and Spence, Wilder and AJ. We can't have no more repeats of that. That has to stop. I think the modern day template for this problem is probably Pacquiao Mayweather. They eventually fought, but it just took too long, didn't it? Got to set a standard for the future prospects, contenders and champions. There's no time to be selfish. Making history isn't just about you and what you think you've accomplished. It's about setting a template for the next generation. All boxers, current heavyweight boxers, and boxers in general should want to be a part of that. And if not, why not? They could overturn some of the medals and results from the 2016 Rio Olympics. So Joe Joyce may get a gold, and I don't know if they're going to relegate Tony Yoka to the silver. A lot of people think Joyce won. I thought it was pretty close. I thought Joyce won as well, though. But there's been an investigation, and a report is published from this investigation by Richard McCracken. He also revealed about Russian state-sponsored doping programs that saw Russia barred from competition. The investigation centers on whether boxers of certain nationalities were favored by referees and judges in Rio. Amongst the countries investigated are France and Uzbekistan, which won more bouts than the best boxing nations who are better than them. It's not yet clear whether Joyce's silver medal will be upgraded to gold if the result is overturned as expected. So they're going to overturn the result. It's just a question if Joyce gets a gold medal. Well, he should really, shouldn't he? Micah Conlan could also find his loss to Vladimir Nitikin overturned as well. I believe that will upgrade Conlan to a silver medal if he's given a medal. I don't know what to make of this. Everybody who isn't normally complimentary to AJ being very sympathetic to him. Shelley Finkel, contrary to belief, I actually like AJ. He brought a lot of money to the sport. Blah, blah, blah. John Fury, oh, don't give AJ a hard time. It was his cornerman who gave him the wrong instructions. Malik Scott, I'm going to block anyone from my Twitter page who calls AJ a bum for losing to a great fighter. Wilder, no compliments, but radio silence on his loss. Tyson Fury, it's not my business. I don't kick people when they're down. In the rematch, he should get stuck in and he was wounded when he saw AJ lose. Now, some people are going to say they're just being classy. That's one argument. The other argument is they're no longer seeing AJ as a threat. When you no longer perceive something or somebody as a threat, you no longer have to be defensive or verbally aggressive, whether they're in your presence or not, when their name comes up. Is this what's happening to AJ now? Good old AJ never has a bad word to say about anybody, but he's no longer a threat now, so let's not kick him when he's down. You need to bring back the fear factor, AJ, where they're talking shit about you, or it's not a good sign. Probably doesn't like it when they talk shit about his career, but when they're doing that, that's because you are still a perceived threat. When they're being nice to you, you got to look at that. With Usyk, we're now waiting to see how that win plays out. In 3 or 4 fights, people might be saying that loss wasn't too bad, AJ, considering what he'd done to X, Y, and Z. Who knows? Or that loss, depending how AJ rebounds from it, could relegate him to a lot of undeserved uncomplimentary assessments on him. But it could relegate him to that, in some people's opinions. Leonard Ellaby, his opinion on the AJ fight: ditch Robert McCracken and work with Stephen Edwards, who I believe worked with Julian J-Rock Williams. That's his claim to fame. This is what I'm saying. A lot of people are saying switch trainers, AJ, but your pick for a new trainer will be rubbished by somebody else, and their pick will be rubbished by somebody else. You know, being a guy who hops trainers didn't stop Amir Khan getting knocked out by everybody he trained under, did it? Anyway, AJ said he's learned from the loss to Alexander Usyk. He said he's watched the fight, he's analysed his preparations, identified his mistakes. He said, don't worry about me, my spirit is strong. So he believes there's adjustments he can make to make him more effective against Usyk. I don't know what they are. I guess we'll see by the time they're back in the ring. I will say this though, as much as AJ can identify his mistakes, Usyk can also identify his own mistakes and where he could have did better. I mean, everybody on their dog is saying AJ needs to be more aggressive. Well, you don't think Usyk's going to be prepared for that potential outcome? Or at least be preparing for it? I think this is the first rematch Usyk would have had as a pro. He was the technician. Normally the superior technician does better in a rematch. Fury Wilder, Hopkins Pascal, Ali Frazier, Robinson LaMotta, Leonard Duran, Azuma Nelson, Jeff Venich. Got Joe Louis, Max Schmeling, an exception to the rule. At that stage there, Schmeling was the more technical out of the two, being one of the first fighters to actually use tape to study his opponents. So when Joe threw that left jab and dropped it, Schmeling devised a plan for it and countered it with right crosses and put the first L on Lewis's record. Knocked him out in 12 rounds. 2 years later, Lewis was champion and they had a rematch and Joe destroyed him in a round. Lewis's jab was more compact this time. This time when he saw the right hand counter coming, he moved away. He didn't get caught flush. He was a little wiser. Joshua has to look to neutralize that backhand from the first round, from the jump. Can't get caught flush. Not because it's necessarily going to hurt him. It's the confidence that it's going to give Usyk to build off that. Can't let him get his game plan off. Fury, on the video conference, he said, AJ needs to start swinging if it's not going his way. Just start swinging. I go back to that Steve Cunningham fight. Cunningham was the superior technician at that time. Fury had the size advantage. When trying to pit wits with a smaller technical guy and was coming up short, what did Tyson Fury do? He put that big forearm in Cunningham's face and obscured his vision, then took him out with the right hand. Not exactly this technical boxing which he's been so heralded for, but yo, shit got real. And trust me, the knockdown wasn't the only time that Fury was hurt. I'm not saying he was getting shot to pieces or anything like that, but Cunningham was landing good shots, getting his attention. Some of the shots made Fury clinch. A lot of it was made of Kronk style when Fury beat Wilder in the rematch. I'd say he just went back to the caravan park fighting style that he used against Steve Cunningham. just probably a little more refined than what he was then. Some people were saying that Anthony Joshua's foot position wasn't correct with the southpaw. I can't recollect exactly what they said. This, that, and that. And yes, that will have to be addressed. But Joshua's got to make the Usyk rematch an ugly fight. An ugly fight. Use all your anatomy. Shoulders, elbows. Try and draw him into clinches. Drain him in the clinches. Maybe even be Vladimir-esque. Put that stone plus bulk all over him when you're leaning on. Drain him. I heard some channels giving Vladimir Klitschko credit for his clinch game against Povetkin. AJ didn't use that. AJ beat Povetkin, a technically very sound fighter. He got hit a whole load of times in the early round. Eventually he got Povetkin out of there. Klitschko didn't even try and box in open play with Povetkin. He was just draining him and leaning down on him. AJ needs to smother and stop him getting off first. That's a must. Vladimir Klitschko turned pro in 1996, the same year he won the Olympics. Vladimir was put on a canvas by Steve Parnell in 98. He got back up and won. The Parnell fight was in Germany. He was stopped by Ross Purity, who was 24, 13, and 1. He ran out of gas in the 11th. This was in the Ukraine. Became champion in 2000, outpointing Chris Bird. Was knocked out in 2003 by Corey Sanders. Knocked out in 2004 by Lamont Brewster. In his next fight, he was floored and cut pretty badly by Devarel Williamson, and it was called a technical decision in the 5th round. Now, some will argue that Vlad was able to come back due to the weak nature of the competition. It's that which has played a part in him amassing a 10-year run as champion. And yeah, you could make the argument that the heavyweight division is stronger these days than it was between his last defeat against Lamont Brewster, 2004, I believe, up until Tyson Fury ended his reign in November of 2015. So Vlad overcame several setbacks, and like I said, you could argue the competition weren't as tough. There's also Emmanuel Stewart being brought in to train Vlad. He tightened a lot of stuff up. You know, fighters make adjustments to become more effective. And getting knocked out and getting beaten up does affect you. But you know what annoys me with this argument is every time we talk about it, it's just AJ is the only guy affected. When there's fighters, good fighters, getting decked, knocked out, stopped, beaten up all the time. But when the psychology of a beating is brought up, AJ's name is the only name that seems to come up. After John Ruiz got knocked out by David Tua, he became way more cautious. He threw less punches and was wary about getting knocked out, but he tightened up considerably. Klitschko tightened up considerably when he was with Manny Stewart. He was a way more exciting fighter before Manny Stewart got to him. The clinching became a factor, as demonstrated in the fight with Povetkin. Is this what AJ is going to be reduced to preserve himself? Maybe so. It won't make him very popular with the fan base he's developed, though. Amir Khan had been knocked out a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3, before he went to Virgil Hunter. And Virgil tightened up a few things. You know, he didn't throw as much punches, concentrated more on the quality of the punches he was throwing, and he straightened out his footwork in terms of him overextending himself or throwing shots that would leave him open to counters. And it was successful against Louis Collazo and Devin Alexander, arguably 2 of his biggest wins of his career. But he soon went back to type, didn't he? Tyson Fury, he became less reckless after the Cunningham fight and worked a lot more on keeping range, straightening his shots out, picking his punches better, using his jab more effectively. We don't know what Deontay Wilder is going to be going into that ring next week. Are we going to see a fighter who's not quite recovered from the Fury loss? Let's not forget, not all fighters have ghosts. Like Dylan, was there any ghosts present when he avenged his loss against Povetkin? No, he was fearless. He was probably more aggressive in the rematch than he was in the first fight. Vlad was also aided by the dynamic of how content is processed. When Vlad was taking them L's, all the way up until the Lamont Brewster L, I was buying boxing news religiously. That's how I got all my boxing news, from boxing magazines. Yeah, there was YouTube in 2004, no doubt. But there was no social media as we know it today. That was still developing. If Vlad had took all them L's with the spotlight of global social media watching, how would that have affected him mentally? I spoke about that with Manny Pacquiao. If he had took all them L's where he's getting knocked out when he was a flyweight, and the whole of the global social media world was looking at him, how would that have affected him? That's why they want Campbell Hatton to go on small hall shows. Adam Smith was talking about it, because it's less pressure. Making a few mistakes here and there won't affect him as bad. The way a lot of boxing fans, and I'm talking about the ones who talk like they have all the answers, the way they react to somebody losing and write people off. How do you think these guys, because I think they're casuals, how do you think they would have reacted when Vlad was floored by Parnell, stopped by Purity, Corey Sanders and Lamont Brewster? They'd have been saying, no, that's it, he's dead. They wouldn't have been forecasting a 10-year run, even if the competition was a little diluted. Look how much losses Mike Weaver had on his record. He became heavyweight champion. Guarantee a lot of you looking at his record saying, he was garbage. You didn't see the Larry Holmes fight. He was on the verge of taking that belt from Holmes in that fight. On the verge. Anyone looking at a boxer and looking at the people who he lost against as the sole gauge to how good he is an idiot. Ken Norton, before he fought Ali, became the second man to beat Ali. He's got a lot of L's on his record early on against names that you wouldn't recognize. Guys like Dick Tiger, Hogan Kidbassi, African fighters who started their careers in the UK. They've got loads of L's early on their record, mostly because they were black fighters and they were just giving a lot of them decisions to the white British fighter. But they've got L's on their records. Bob Foster, didn't he go out to Peru or something early in his career? He lost that fight. Ralph Tiger Jones beat Sugar Ray Robinson, a good Sugar Ray Robinson. Tiger Jones was a good fighter actually, but he was a gatekeeper. That same year, he fights Rocky Castellani and wins a split decision, goes down for a count of 9. A lot of people in the arena will tell you that it was a 10 count. Now the fight's in line, you can go judge for yourself. Boxing is not an easy sport. It's not an easy sport. If you lose to an unfancied fighter, or a gatekeeper if you want, and you haven't been fighting good competition, then yeah, that should be held against you. But if you've been beating good competition, and some fighter who's not supposed to beat you, that can't all of a sudden make you a bad fighter. Just like that gatekeeper beating somebody who has world-class bodies on their resume, that doesn't make the gatekeeper a great fighter if he beats that guy. It was just his night. If Fury loses to Wilder, Fury's fan base are going to be sent into a tailspin of doing damage control from all them accolades and headlines he's been getting, because there's going to be a lot of people who can't wait to jump on that and tell you that Fury was the worst heavyweight ever. I keep using that word balance on my channel, but it's an important word, isn't it? I believe if Fury gets beaten, it will put some perspective on the praise he gets from certain sections of the media and his boxing fans who put his name up there with Muhammad Ali and the greats, when his resume doesn't have enough bodies on there to be ever considered in that esteemed class. Yes, that'll put some perspective on that. But at the same time, we can't be relegating the guy to a bum who I always knew couldn't fight. That's just not right. If Wilder loses again, no, I don't think he has the greatest resume. But he was exciting, he was a good puncher. He had 10 defenses of that WBC belt. But it would just mean his career is going through a bad patch. Like Vlad had that bad patch. You know, like his brother Vitaly. When he lost to Chris Bird, I think that's the same belt that Vlad took from Chris Bird, that WBO belt. Vitaly quit. He quit in his corner. Shoulder injury. Once again, there wasn't a big social media presence on the internet. There was social media, there was the internet, But it wasn't the presence that we know today. You see, there wasn't these platforms for these know-it-all casuals who know shit all to be voicing their opinions about all these great fighters in the past who took L's in their career but came back to become greats. But these days, you take an L like when AJ lost against Andy Ruiz. How many people were saying he shouldn't take the immediate rematch? Because Ruiz was a superior fighter to him. Now it's the same people or people with a similar mind state saying that AJ shouldn't take the Usyk rematch. Not enough historical data researched and just too reactionary. That's all it is. And for those who don't know, Larry Merchant was steaming into Klitschko. But he made some valid points.
What a personal reversal. 10 days ago, Chris Bird was still in the darker reaches of the heavyweight division, preparing to fight Adolfo Washington for $25,000. Now let's go to Larry Merchant with Vitaly Klitschko.
Vitaly, what happened? You seemed to be way, way ahead in the fight. That all you had to do was survive till the end of the 12th round to win the fight. Why would you give up your title in those circumstances?
I couldn't in every round win enough points.
So you thought you were behind in the fight?
I will come back into the ring sound and I will win back my title.
Shouldn't a prize fighter be able to fight when he's hurt?
I don't want to fight and get an injury and not be able to fight anymore. I want to be able to go back into the ring and fight.
Yep. Vitaly Klitschko fans, some of you were in denial when people have brought up the fact that he quit against Chris Bird. You're in denial. He did quit. Imagine if Twitter, YouTube and Facebook was like what it is now. Had such an influence on how people view boxers. He would have been wrote off. But he came back and kind of restored his name against Lennox Lewis. Then he won the WBC belt in 2004, made one defense against Danny Williams, took 4 years out, came back in 2008 and held on to the belt until September 2012. That seals his legacy as a great, perhaps, in some people's opinion. Once again, people argue that Vlad and Vitaly's era consisted of weak competition. A lot of people, they either didn't watch boxing in certain eras they want to discuss boxing about, or they're just really biased. Like, one guy was questioning me saying that Anthony Joshua is one of the best European heavyweights ever. He's saying, what's he talking about? That prime Vlad would have knocked out AJ. Well, what prime Vlad is that? The one who got knocked down by Parnell? The one who got stopped by Ross Purity? The one who got stopped by Corey Sanders? The one who got stopped by Lamont Brewster? Or the one who knocked out Kubrat Pulev? Well, what about the Vlad that AJ knocked out? He wanted the fight. He didn't get the Fury rematch. And he said he was obsessed with AJ. So all of a sudden you want to rubbish that Vladimir Klitschko? Can't stop you not trying to. What, Vitaly would have beat AJ? Maybe he would. But this is a man who quit against Chris Bird. He quit. So it's all right having rose-coloured glasses and be jumping on the bandwagon when AJ's loss is still fresh. But my guess is he's always hated AJ. Probably when AJ knocked out Vlad, it really pissed him off. You know? You want to say Vlad could have beat AJ in his prime. The truth is, AJ fought one of the best Vlads he could have fought. Because the Vlad who was losing to Corey Sanders and Lamont Brewster was very vulnerable. Was a very vulnerable heavyweight. He had rough patches he had to get through in his career, and he got through them. You can't weaponize losses against fighters you don't like and then want to gloss over the losses that the fighter you like had to take. That's just, it's weak boxing analysis. It's weak. If AJ cannot come through this other side of this rough patch, then we'll document it. Okay, like it's 2021. Let's say if AJ goes through that period that Roy Jones went through. After he beat Ruiz, he fought on for another 15 years and took 8 losses, 5 of them by knockout. It was never to ascend to world championship level again. Not really comparable to the first phase of his career that spanned 14 years. If AJ can get some bona fide wins against top contenders and champions, then the losses would have to be put in perspective. Not by nutters like who want to write off everybody after they took a loss or took a L, but people who know how to break boxing down. Now, if you think AJ is just the worst and a failure, that's fair enough. I'm never going to change your mind. And I'm not trying to change your mind. But the fair thing to do is allow his career to play out. His career hasn't played out yet. Look at Orlando Salido, the start of his career. Now, I think the first phase of Roy Jones's career is enough to seal his legacy. Let's say the first 14, 13 years. That's enough to seal his legacy. Some people say the second phase spoilt his career. Well, it depends what you mean by spoilt his career. How many other middleweights were able to lift a portion of the heavyweight championship? Bob Fitzsimmons and who else? Now that's an exclusive club that only Roy and Bob belong to. Wow, so I think it's too late for the WBC to scrap this Bridgerweight thing, but they really need to scrap it. So Bryant Jennings has been removed from taking on Oscar Rivas for the first inaugural Bridgerweight title fight sanctioned by the WBC due to a dispute surrounding Canada's quarantine policy for visitors who have not yet received the COVID-19 vaccination. Why hasn't Bryant been vaccinated? This fight was proposed a long time ago. Long time ago. I believe it's been postponed and rescheduled. There's no excuse for why he's not vaccinated. So he's been removed and replaced by a Canadian boxer named Ran Rozicki, who's 13-0. I don't recognize none of the names on there. I don't. Let's look at the records. First opponent, 1-5-0. The next opponent, 7-6-0. The next, 1-1-4. 10-3-2. Another one, 14-20 and 2. 16-5-1. 9-7-0. He did fight somebody who was 8-0 undefeated. His last opponent was 8-6-0. His record is filled with 8-round, 6-round, 4-round fights. He's had 3 scheduled 10-rounders, which haven't went the limit. And guess what? He's not ranked by the WBC. He's not ranked in their top 15. Let the fight go ahead. Let it go ahead. But don't let it be for no Bridgerweight title. The name is ridiculous anyway. You can't have that as your first title fight, man. Maybe you can fight 13-0 with 13 KOs. I'm at the point of not caring no more. Let Rivas get a payday, innit? It's suspect to me. Maybe because there ain't too many Canadian world champions. They're trying to make sure the belt stays in Canada. I wonder what Bryant Jennings has got to say about it. So, this is his Twitter activity. He's put up this graphic or some poster about Rivas versus Rozicki. That was 30 minutes ago. Then he says, watch out for who ain't about shit. They're dangerous. They want company. That was 2 hours ago. 1 day ago, he said, I'm not into pity parties, so if you're around me, knowing my current circumstances, do not attempt to disrupt me with BS that don't concern me or have lack of sympathy for me in my situation. Shit will go back to normal, but if your problem is not real, don't interrupt mine with selfishness. I'm out.